I'd like to say one brief statement, please.
About this number letter?
Just in general before we start.
Okay.
I appreciate the time that my colleagues have put into the Select Board's policies, and since I was not included in this process, I will take a moment now to voice my concerns about the proposed changes. The power granted to the chair to censure board members and remove them from committees seems excessive. And although I recognize some need to limit public comment, I believe this is an overreach that will discourage citizen engagement and participation. Of particular concern to me was the proposal to stop the long-standing policy of allowing any member of the board to add items to the agenda. In its place, an agreement by a 3-member majority would have been required.
It's not in here.
If this change,
That's not it.
I'm trying to get to what I'm saying. If this change had been voted in, it would have suppressed the minority voice on the board, and by extension suppressed the voices of many of the citizens of Great Barrington. It would have worked against the principles of democracy and flouted our board's process. Any attempt to squelch the minority vote has no place in our town's policies. Although this proposal has been withdrawn following public pressure, it begs the question as to why this was proposed in the first place. It's important that we as citizens are vigilant in protecting our rights of free speech. Every bit as important is this board's duty to its constituents to allow for full and equal representation to the board. I look forward to contributing to the next round of proposals, and I urge my fellow board members to engage in a thoughtful and inclusive dialogue moving forward.
Can I have the microphone, please?
So just to correct a couple of comments there, board members did not have any input on this other than Kate, because that would be deliberation and we wouldn't want to do that. As far as the 3 members, that was an idea that I had floated, it was no one else's. It was put here for deliberation only, it didn't have to be approved by the board. I talked to some other former chairs and they thought it was a bad idea, so I took it out so we didn't even have to discuss it. It wasn't to stop a minority opinion by any means. What I was trying to do, which had not happened in the past and has not happened, so it's probably an overreach, was there are times when the chair is asked to put something on the board, on the agenda, and when that happens, if the chair doesn't think it's right, they're not ready. The select board has a right, any member has a right to put something on the agenda. But if we say, it's gonna be 4 or 6 weeks before the town manager is ready for that, this policy doesn't allow us to do that. So it was an idea that was not a good idea, but I had put it on there for discussion, and it was, I withdrew it when I talked to some other former board members. So first, E. Do we have a motion on E?
A comment that we are an administrative and executive body, although we delegate those functions. So here's a suggestion I have for wording to put in here somewhere. The board's function is to create policy as authorized by town meeting vote or mass general laws. The board has delegated executive and administrative functions to the town manager and staff, who report to the entire board, not to individual board members. Does that do the same thing? And then,
For E, you want?
yeah,
So make a motion to replace E that
I'm
way.
not sure exactly where it goes. I'm sort of running this by Kate, who wrote this.
I found it. I didn't write it.
Oh, sorry.
I had a question. So it's saying that we're not the executive bodies. Is that?
Well, that's my point, is we are, although we have delegated those. So as individuals, we don't do things.
Aren't we accountable to the citizens and not?
Yeah, that's the first line, right? The primary responsibility of the board is to all citizens of Great Barrington. Then I would go with the board's function is to create policy as authorized by town meeting vote or mass general law. The board has delegated executive and administrative functions to the town manager and staff, who report to the entire board, not individual board members. Then we should pick up somewhere in here. Anybody have an idea?
Ed, I beg your pardon, would you tell me what page you're on?
Page 2,
Thank you.
E.
E. If we're gonna rewrite this section,
Should we come back?
If we're gonna rewrite this section, I'm gonna ask Ed to come back at our next meeting to do this section, and you can, run it by the town manager.
I have notes on that section too, so. which
So,
one
and
is
Lee,
the
I
best
was gonna
way?
suggest you and Ed work together on that section. Because two members can work on that, would that be okay?
Sure.
Is that
So-
okay, Lee?
Yeah, so if I had specific questions, just go through Ed.
Oh, you should probably ask him now.
On E we're talking about?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just wondering personal benefit, that kind of is it seems very open to interpretation. So I'm just wondering where that's, if someone could explain what that means.
That came from our town council, and I'm sure that's boilerplate wording, which can be removed. This is here for discussion.
So I'm just wondering, is there a reason why we have a code of conduct now? Is it something, am I missing something, that we never had a code of conduct and now we're going down this road?
So the reason that I started to look into all of this was when I started on the board. I was new to this, and I wanted to do a good job, and I felt like there was a lot of different ways in which people were operating. And I was looking at our select board policy, which we had currently, which doesn't have these kind of things in it, and it doesn't really outline specific ways to do this job as a select board member. And I watched different things happening, and so I worked with Steve last, fall on the select board policy so that I could learn more about what the exact work of being a select board member was. But I felt like that didn't get me all the way to really understanding that. And when you start as a select board member, you get your, you do any board that you get onto, you do your open meeting, you get a packet, you read it, you do your online, your conflict of interest, which would also be the personal benefit that you're referring to when you read your conflict of interest. You can't be doing this for personal benefit. So I think that what I wanted to do and see is that as a new member, without having some sort of new member orientation, some new way of that our select board policy reflected the general concept of what it meant to be a select board member and what it meant to fulfill that role and our duty to our community and what we've signed up to do. And so that we're all acting together for a common goal. So that's why.
So, just because I hadn't seen this until it was actually published on the website under the packet, but was there any other board member that had seen this before this?
no,
Yes, we all saw it. I brought it to the meeting.
well, not this copy.
Not this particular copy, but a complete, I brought from the town of Pepperell.
That's two different things. The code of conduct was brought and handed out at a specific meeting from two different towns. But as far as this, no, this is,
You didn't talk to anyone else?
no.
Just go.
So, can I make a motion on this section?
If you want to, or if you can, well, let's try. You can do whatever.
I'm just gonna make a motion to be accepted as written.
Which one?
F?
E or
No,
F?
E.
E I'm coming back with, right?
E we'll come back with, so F. So Lee, let's just make sure we're clear. Lee and Ed are gonna work on E.
I just had a clarification question.
On F?
D, I guess on F.
Okay?
Binding, what is to bind outside the meeting, what does that mean? So there's something that says,
Can somebody read it?
sure, oh, sorry about that.
Good.
Can you do the line?
This is under responsibility to fellow board members and others. And
Read the whole paragraph.
Sure. In relation with fellow select board members and other persons, a board member shall acknowledge differences of opinion as part of the democratic process, treat others with respect and act in a civil manner, refrain from personal criticism, respect that board action at official meetings is binding, and that she alone cannot bind the select board outside such meetings. Refrain from making statements or promises regarding how she will vote on matters that will come before the select board, not withhold relevant information on town matters, either from the select board members or other town bodies or departments whose duties relate to that information. make decisions only after all the facts on the issue have been presented to and discussed by the select board, cooperate with the chair in the conduct of meetings. So my question was regarding the binding, so it says,
So the first one is respect that board action at official meetings is binding. In other words, once a vote's taken, this is how I interpreted this, although I didn't write this, is that once a vote's taken, for instance, I'll go with the Lake Mansfield, there was a 4-to-1 vote to close the road. Once that vote was taken and I was the minority vote, I respect that vote of the board, and I realize that I support that vote once it's taken.
but then didn't we re-vote on that afterwards? Didn't we have a re-vote after that?
Not on, no, we
Close
did
the
not.
road.
No, we have not changed our,
No, but after the second time when it did come up and they,
The paving we voted on several times.
closing the road.
And then the second time it's used, which, this is the one I think it was your question, understands that he, she alone cannot bind the select board outside such meetings. So if I'm at a meeting at River Oaks for Youth and they say, would the select board do this? Usually the first words out of my mouth are, I don't speak for the select board, I can bring it up at a meeting. Rather than saying the select board agrees to do that, none of us can do that as individuals. So that's what that means. None of us can bind the select board as
Can
individuals.
we use some different language, because that's very confusing.
Okay, this is a board discussion, so at this point, thank
I
you.
know. Just been using.
So, did you make a motion?
So, no, let me do that now. So I'm going to make a motion that we accept the paragraph F now as written.
A second. Other discussion?
I would like to add something. So in general, throughout all of this, I'm hoping that maybe this needs to be a separate motion, but all the he, she, him, her, all become they. If we could just switch it all to a gender neutral
We can
term,
make it
I would,
gender neutral.
yeah,
without a
so
vote, that's
I
fine.
don't think we need to vote on it, but that's the one thing. I just keep seeing it come up and
Yeah.
wanna.
So I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor in F?
Aye.
So it's unanimous.
I'm not, I didn't.
I'm sorry, I thought I saw your hand go.
No,
Opposed?
me.
We are now on page 4, and this to me, A is the only change, and this is more housekeeping because it wasn't clear in here. Any member wishing to add an agenda item shall make the request in writing to the chair. And that's typically on any board, but it wasn't clear in here, and it shouldn't go to the town manager, it should go to the chair. So that's the only change in that section.
Motion to approve is written.
What number?
Wait.
Oh, page 4, V,
Yeah.
preparing the agenda, A. There's a sentence inserted into the middle.
So I have a motion, do I have a second? Discussion.
Yeah, discussion.
Lee, go ahead.
So I had a question under B, on preparing the agenda. It says any items,
Should we do A first?
Yeah.
okay. So I just had, in A, it says that the chair, vice chair, and the town manager are responsible for preparing the agenda, but then, the page before that, when it says officers of the board, it just says that the chair and the town manager are responsible for the agenda. So I'm just wondering, does the chair, where does that come in, that the vice chair prepares the agenda? Because it's confusing, because here it says it's just the chair and the town manager that do the agenda, and here it says it's included the vice chair.
So we should add that to the duties of the vice chair. That's a fairly new responsibility started by Sean Stanton, so it probably didn't get changed in here, that's why.
We'll do that next.
Okay. So is there a reason why the vice chair is, did that come up, did that have a discussion about inserting the vice chair as preparing the agenda, or is that,
That was back so long ago, I'll be honest. I
so
don't
we're just
remember.
gonna add this here?
I think we should change that there after we do A. That's a good catch.
Yeah, I mean, and part of it too is that I think in that section beforehand, it does say that the vice chair will act as the chair when when the chair is not available. So I think in some way that might be why the vice chair slipped in later on, without it kind of going into that first part.
So we have a motion on A, which is just that any board member wishing to add an agenda item shall make the request in writing to the chair. We have a motion and a second. Other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So unanimous? Okay, so let's go back to
Page 3, number 3, officers of the board, B, vice chair clerk. What do we need to add? The vice chair shall participate in creating the agenda?
yes.
Where do you want to put that?
We could, just as long as we add it in.
Okay, insert the words, the vice chair shall participate in creating the agenda.
And do I have a second?
Second.
And discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay, so the next part is, page 5.
Sorry, I have a question on B, on preparing the agenda.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So I had a question, it says, any items requested by members of the board, and then the 3 is crossed out.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me just say, it's any items requested by members of the board shall be placed on the agenda. However, the chair, vice chair, and town manager may use discretion and may need to defer a topic to the next.
Okay, so my question is, will use discretion? That seems very a liberal interpretation and very subjective, so I would like to move that that's taken out. And I would like to know why that was in, and if someone could clarify
That's
what
been
they...
in this policy for.
I would like to make a motion that it's actually taken out, because using discretion is very subjective, and without having a reason why a chair could just use their discretion to take something out of
No,
agenda.
no, it's not to take it out, it's.
Well,
what
not
meeting we put
to,
it in.
exactly, so I would like to make a motion that that phrase "will use discretion" is taken out.
So is your intent that if a member of the board asks for something, it has to be on the next agenda? As opposed to, this gives it a 2 agendas?
Yes, at least it's clear.
No, I'm just asking, I'm just want to make sure I understand. So if Ed comes, well, let's use Bill. Bill comes to me on a Wednesday and says, I want something on the agenda. Right now, the way our policy is, if either the next meeting is packed or the town manager or administration don't think they can get the item done for the next meeting, we have the ability to put it on the meeting after that, no later. Is that your choice to make it at the next meeting?
Well, I just think that that's fair, because if some things, you defer, and some things you say, okay, well, we have to wait, it doesn't seem clear. So if you don't think it can fit in the, that agenda, at least it's level ground. I have a question about using discretion,
So you're okay with it being 1 meeting away, you just don't want to use the word discretion?
I think, yes, because at least that would be clear. So for me, is anyone not understanding what I'm saying?
No, now that I do, I'm
Okay.
fine with that.
So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, if you're just
I would also like to, is there a way, if something isn't, if a board member requests something on the agenda and they are denied that,
Well, they can't be denied the way this is written right now.
unless it's moved, with discretion to the next meeting. So I'd just like to say that if it's moved to the next meeting, is there a reason, is there a way to have that in writing why it was moved, or some?
Well, it has to be in writing to get it on the request on the agenda to begin with. I think if you take out, to use discretion, we're saying that any item requested by members of the board shall be placed on the agenda. However, the chair, vice chair, and town manager may need to defer the topic to the next available meeting. I have to say that taking out the words "will use discretion" doesn't really make that much of a difference, because it's gonna get deferred one way or another if it doesn't feel right to get it on that next thing. I feel like we are being overly clear about everything that we're putting in here right now, so probably it should say that it would be, you receive in writing why, just because I feel like we are really over clarifying, so why not keep over clarifying? But I would think if you sent an email to a chair and vice chair and town manager and asked for something to be on an agenda, and they felt that it needed to be deferred until the next meeting, that you would get notice of that, because it's probably something you would need to prepare for one way or the other.
Yeah, I have no problem with the notification. I'd rather do it personally, but we want to put it down in writing, that's fine too.
I'm fine
Yeah.
putting it in writing.
I would like to have it in writing, please.
So what are we adding?
I think that in the item B, which we're working on, agenda items, maybe at the end, like after,
Available meeting, and the requester will be notified in writing. That's,
Yeah.
requester is the wrong word. I'll make the motion, I'm gonna vote against it, because I think this is getting silly. What's wrong with picking up the phone, saying we're delaying it for a week because we don't have what we need? So,
Go for it.
okay, the motion is to add the words after the next available meeting, and will then inform the member who requested.
Well, should I give some background on why I'm requesting this? Would that help clarify?
Sure.
So I did have an item that I requested to be on the agenda, that I was led to believe that it was going to be on the agenda, only to hear the next day that it was not. And I had expected that it would have been on the agenda, and I wasn't notified. So that's why I'm making this request. So I'm sorry that it seems that I'm, making this unduly complex, but I do have the reasons. And thinking of, future board members that follow in my position, I think, it's respectful for us to know whether, when we request something to be on the agenda and it's turned down, that we actually are notified without having to wait to read the agenda packet on the website. So that's what I think it's very important, that someone that has requested something is notified. So thank you.
Okay, motion.
So I think I made it?
Make it again.
So motion to add, unless you'd like to make it, Lee.
I'd like to make a motion that notification in writing to the select board member that does not get their item on the agenda is communicated.
Let's just change it to next agenda, because you're gonna get it on the agenda. Just to be
To
clear.
the next agenda.
Okay, so do I have a second? Okay, there's no second.
So, move that we accept the changes as written. Second.
Where are you?
We're in B, I don't think.
B doesn't have any changes.
Okay.
That's the original language.
Okay.
So, I guess, the reason I didn't second what Lee had said is just because I feel like it needs to be concise in this. I feel like if we're adding to A, any board member wishing to add an agenda item should make that request in writing to the chair. I mean, that seems really, to be honest, it seems really piddly to me. So I think if we're making that piddly of a change, that I think we should be making this piddly of a change on the other end.
Or we just take out in writing on both.
No, I think if we need to be this clear, let's be this clear. So can I
You can make a motion.
amend or make a motion or
Make a motion,
withdraw?
there's nothing to amend.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we add, after in line B, after defer a topic to the next available meeting, and notify said board member in writing.
That was Lee's motion, wasn't it?
I just made my motion.
Was, but I don't know.
Well, I have a motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
I,
So that's 3 opposed.
No.
No, 3-2, so that
I
passes.
don't understand what just happened. Did you just repeat the motion that I
think so.
made?
That's, I think you did, I think you
you
did.
think I did? I didn't think that I did. I apologize.
I think you did.
I felt like it, I'm sorry. I did not mean for that to happen.
Okay, so page 5, citizen speak procedure. So let me give some background to this. We had a citizen who was concerned that we were taking up special permit under citizen speak, not during the special permit process. In other words, the meetings that did not have it on there. And they were concerned that that wasn't, I'll use, for lack of a better term, that may prejudice the board, and there were problems with that. Initially, we took that under advisement. I was speaking to David Dineski, our attorney, and asked him what he thought about that. And what he said was, he considered that to be deliberation outside of the special permitting process, and he was concerned also because the applicant may not necessarily be present for that, to hear that. This is a recommendation by town council, this was written by town council. My only statement is that the board should be notified of this, so we have, this is in here. If the board wants to take this up, they can. If they don't want to, they don't have to. What we've been doing is notifying the people that they're not speaking as part of the special permitting process and it won't be on the record. Our attorney didn't think that was strong enough, so it's up to the board.
Yeah, the risk we run, if I understand it right, is the risk we run is if we've been listening to people speak about an applicant when the applicant isn't present and not during the hearing, and we reject an application, it gives the applicant grounds to challenge it and could actually weaken our process. I don't know if anyone else has it.
So again, this is on G.
Yes.
So I would make a motion just to strike this, but my big question is the point that when it says citizen speak time shall be used for comments or questions regarding a matter which is pending before or will be scheduled to come before the select board. So I find that that's again
So you left a sentence, you left the most important part, as part of the public hearing.
as part of a public hearing.
Yeah,
So.
that's only the special permitting process.
Okay, so or will be scheduled, so let's say hypothetically, we have something that will eventually need to go through public hearing because the special permitting process, but we haven't reached that point, but we know down the line it's gonna be coming. You're saying that a citizen can't speak about that
So first,
because?
I'm not saying this is our attorney.
Okay.
And secondly, I agree with you, so I asked him when that clock would start.
Okay,
And it would be when the application was filed. Once the special permit application was filed.
okay, so that needs to be clarified here. I don't think it's clarified. And I hesitant, I think that this is an overreach, this particular issue. I think the way that we've been doing it so far and letting people say it's not gonna be part of the record and let them speak, because I think a lot of things that citizens have are very, very timely, and it's actually something that I have time to look into and investigate on my own time. And I think it's really important that citizens, when they make the effort and are engaged, that they speak. And I have a very, very big problem about limiting citizen speak here, so I am strongly against this.
That's fine. If no one makes a motion, we won't add this in here.
I'll make the motion to see where we get, and then we'll speak about it. Citizen speak time shall, I don't know if we need to add something about it being filed.
Yeah, you should.
Right, okay, so citizen speak time shall not be used for comments or questions regarding a matter which is pending before or the application has been filed for it to come before the select board. As part of the public hearing, comments and questions on such a matter may be presented during the hearing process. So I'm adding, instead of will be scheduled, I think I'm saying, or the application has been filed.
Yes. Once the application.
Once
was
the
filed.
How will
application.
the public know that it's filed? Is that public record or is that?
Yes.
Yeah, just public.
So if there's a second, I'll speak to that.
Go ahead a second. So Lee, that's another good question that I asked, and the process that we would set up if this happened would be that well, in this case, Chris, who gets all the special permits, would notify whoever the chair was, so that when there was public comment, that they would know what special permits had been filed.
Okay, I know we're ready to vote on this, but again,
No, those comments are fine.
yeah, I'm just saying that, I just think it's really discouraging.
I really think that by having this included, it's really discouraging citizen engagement and participation, and it's very, very limiting. And I really think that part of the citizen speak and public comment process is this kind of dialogue that the select board can listen and I have a very, very strong feeling that this should not even be part of this.
Did the lawyer extend, and did this extend to letters that we receive, or
No.
just what is said at
So
citizen
why is
speak
that?
time?
Yes, I understand that.
Well, any letters that we receive become part of the public hearing process. Those end up in the files.
They're seen by the applicant as well. That's his fear, is that the applicant isn't part of this process.
I'm not wed to this. This was a recommendation of our lawyer.
So my concern is if we have an applicant with deep pockets and we are relatively certain we're going to get one, they can afford to challenge any mistake we make. Our attorney is telling us we're making a mistake here. I just think it's not a bad idea to follow his advice. Again, with the best of intentions, we can listen to citizens who are voicing opposition to something when the something isn't in the room, and the fact that we're listening will then help the applicant challenge our decision, because they weren't here and it wasn't following its process. We are expected, we play the role of judge in a special permit, so we have to be impartial, and this is our attorney advising us this is our attorney advising, I'm not the chair, advising us on a way to be impartial.
There's no public comment on this. And just so everyone's clear, I only brought this forward at the recommendation of our attorney. I didn't write this or think that I'm not advocating it, but our attorney
I
did.
thought you said Kate brought this up.
No, not this one.
So this is confusing, I thought.
No.
There's a memo in the packet from
Yeah.
the attorney
Yes.
on this.
This was, I explained at the beginning, this part was brought, a citizen sent an email to Mark and myself saying they thought we were maybe in jeopardy of having problems with special permits. We took that under advisement when we were talking to the attorney, brought this up, and he felt strongly that this should be in our policies. So I brought it forward because I think the board should be informed, doesn't mean the board has to accept it. So I had a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
Is that three?
so far.
So far.
Opposed?
Aye.
Three to two?
We haven't gotten far yet.
Aye.
4-1. So, we are now on page 5. This has been painful for us, it's painful for the audience, we have a lot more to go. Would the board object if we continue this to the next meeting? Anyone object, please?
No.
Okay, so let's continue this to the next meeting.
Can I just clarify, anything that we just voted on is binding from this moment on?
Yeah, that's true.
And anything that's in there in black is also binding, because it's
Right,
been
that's
binding. That's not new. Can I ask if we are continuing this, that one of the things that I was hoping we would add to this is a reference to our trust policy in our community. Could that be in there?
Can you get that to Mark to add in there?
Yes.
Please. Okay.